Hello and welcome to another Innovation Explained video. When we talk to innovation managers in large organizations, probably the single most common challenge we hear them talk about is the creation of an innovation culture. And that is for good reason. Obviously, a culture plays a huge role on the outcomes that you're going to get out of your innovation efforts, and shaping the culture of an existing organization obviously can be quite challenging. What's more, there are also plenty of misconceptions out there about what an innovative culture actually looks like. So today, we'll explore the topic in a bit more detail and are hoping to give you some pointers on how to get started in shaping the culture of your organization. So with that, let's get started. When you try to picture an innovative company culture, most people think it looks something like what we see on the right side of the image here. There's cozy sofas, plenty of coffee, whiteboards and post-its. It definitely doesn't look like that horrible cubicle farm on the left. But, as you might have guessed, appearances can be deceiving. The image on the left is from SpaceX's offices, which is without a doubt among the most innovative companies on Earth. The image on the right is just a random stock photo you come up with when you search with the term office. So let's look past the cliches and look at what an innovative company culture actually looks like. If you think about it for a few seconds, what kind of words come into mind when you think about an innovative company culture? What should an innovative culture be like? Odds are that your thoughts are pretty much in line with what you see here. These are all, of course, important for innovation, and given how most large organizations are often lacking in some of these areas, whereas in startups those come naturally, it's quite understandable that these are the characteristics that most obsess about. But what most innovators don't realize is that even if you get all of these right, odds are you'll just end up like most startups. Lots of great ideas and initial excitement, and then not much happens. In other words, the end result is innovation theater. What's the problem then? Well, these are the obvious and fun things. Of course, everyone wants to have freedom, psychological safety, and so on. But to really make a difference and succeed, you also need to add some things to the mix that aren't quite as fun, but are at least as important as all of the ones we've mentioned. These are the things you need to have in place to actually make those great ideas a reality. We like to call them the hard stuff. So, for example, just like you need to tolerate failure when you're working on something that no one's been able to achieve before, you also can't tolerate incompetence. You really have to set the bar high. And just like you need to collaborate with people from different disciplines, you also need to hold people individually accountable for doing their part. And just like you need to experiment to find the best solution, you also need to be incredibly disciplined and focus on working on the things that really matter in the big picture and drive results, instead of just tinkering around the edges. You probably get the idea. Anyway, the problem is that for most people, and especially innovators, these characteristics don't necessarily come quite as naturally. You need to push people and get them to go outside of their comfort zones, and for most of us, that just isn't all that fun. Anyway, Harvard professor Gary Pisano wrote a brilliant article on this a while back, so I'll link to that in case you're interested in diving deeper. So, as Professor Pisano well put it in his article, innovative cultures aren't all fun and games. You've all probably heard the stories of how demanding innovative leaders like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk can be, so I won't go into details on these here. But the fact of the matter is that in truly innovative companies, the bar is set extremely high and everyone has to play their part. It's really hard to try to put into words what these cultures actually are like, but the way I'd like to put it is that they are a paradoxical combination of these opposing forces, between hard and soft values, between creativity and discipline, and between freedom and responsibility. As such, there's a lot of tension and intensity, and you'll usually veer a little too much to one side or another, even in the best and most innovative companies. So basically, the best you can do is to really look at your culture objectively and try to identify the areas that are holding you back, and then addressing those issues one by one. So, to help do just that, we've created this innovation culture scorecard. The idea is that you simply rate your culture on each of these 12 essential characteristics, and then use this as a visualization tool for seeing what's holding you back and where potential imbalances are. As we're talking about something as abstract as culture here, there obviously aren't really that many hard figures you could use for doing this evaluation, so you can just subjectively rate each of these 12 characteristics from 0 to 5, with 5 being the best. But if you want to be a bit more thorough with the process, you could also ask your colleagues from across the organization to do the same. Anyway, a perfect innovation culture would have all 12 of these as 5s, but that's obviously not very realistic. So, how do we interpret these results? Well, if we look at the example that I've provided here, it looks like many large organizations that are overall pretty well run, but just not that innovative. There are some good things. Usually there's quite a bit of collaboration and psychological safety, solid leadership, and the organization is pretty used to executing at a high level. But there are also some clear areas that are holding the company back. In this case, there would be lots of planning and little experimentation, lots of meetings, committees, and steering groups involved, but despite many people being involved, few taking ownership and carrying responsibility for actually getting hard things done. Plus, many managers often try to avoid hurting employees' feelings by not giving them critical feedback directly and not really demanding that much from them, which ironically often hurts them more in the long term when they might miss a raise or even a big promotion or just get fired. So for this imaginary company, anything with a score of 1 or 2 is something they'd really need to work on, and the areas where they already have a 4 are great. Even though all of this is of course very subjective, it's still a systematic way you can use to figure out and communicate where your challenges are. You can, by the way, use the scorecard either for the entire organization or just with a single unit within it. It works just as well on both levels. Anyway, once you have a better idea of where you currently are, how do you then go about the process of actually shaping that culture? Well, that's what we'll look into next. Before we talk about the process, let's first explore what the practical things are that actually determine your culture and make up those characteristics. Now, the 2 dimensions that shape a culture are the be, or how the organization sees itself, and the do, or how the organization actually operates and behaves. In practice, the be axis here starts from loosely held statements such as communication and values, and eventually ends up in strongly held views and positions that take much longer to change, such as the authentic identity or the worldview of the organization and people within that. The do axis, on the other hand, works very similarly, but for actions instead of identity. So it starts with things like putting in processes and structures which do have some effect, but without people truly acting accordingly, they are just a starting point. So the end goal is something where incentives and the default unconscious behaviors of people are in line with the culture and identity that you actually seek. So when we put these 2 axes together, the end result is the true culture of an organization. As mentioned, the stated values and held beliefs obviously matter and lay the foundation for a great culture, but in the end, it is the actions and behaviors of people within that organization that determine what the culture truly is like. So, how do we change that? Well, we often hear people say that they can't introduce new innovation practices because the culture isn't there, and the culture isn't there because people don't act like it. It looks like a bit of a chicken and egg problem. However, in reality, a new culture deck or a set of value statements from management isn't really going to change much without those practices being implemented too. On the other hand, if people just work hard and try to make innovation happen all day, the culture will start to change. So if you want to truly change your culture to be more innovative, what really matters is how you operate and behave on the grassroots level. If you just go through all the different processes and ways of working and make sure everything is aligned with your goal of being more innovative at every level of the organization, the culture will inevitably change. Ideally, you'd of course want to shape culture from both directions simultaneously, but if you have to choose, bottom up is the more important of the two. Still, having that strong top-down support will of course make the process a whole lot easier. Anyway, the good thing with that is that even though most of us don't have the authority to change corporate values by ourselves, we can all change the way our own teams work and the way we ourselves work. And that in turn will start to gradually shape the culture. Let's then take a look at how you should go about the process in practice. As mentioned, the changes needed are often quite big, so it obviously won't happen overnight. That means that it's going to be an iterative process and has to be done in baby steps. Still, you should keep the end goal and the why behind the transformation in mind all along and remember to communicate that with everyone over and over again. If the why is believable and motivating, that is what ultimately gets people to come along and commit for the ride. The steps here are mostly pretty self-explanatory, but if you want to go into more detail on these, you might want to check out our Innovation Culture Toolkit, which will help you with the journey and is linked in the description below. Anyway, the idea is that little by little, you're looking to build an innovation movement within the company. A figurative snowball of change that will become an unstoppable avalanche once it eventually reaches critical mass. And to succeed at that, perhaps the most important point is that you need to consistently deliver tangible results with innovation. When you do, and you can communicate and celebrate these moments vocally, it will win over more and more people and keep the momentum going. But if you don't, the excitement and traction can easily die off. If you just focus on some huge big breakthrough innovation that's way down the road, there's a big risk of total failure. And even if you do succeed, most people will lose patience long before the breakthrough innovation starts delivering the results that everyone expects from it. And while you could say that it's a bit short-sighted, the unfortunate reality is that most organizations and leaders are highly unlikely to support and keep investing in innovation for 5 to 10 years without seeing any of those positive results along the way. Anyway, throughout the process, you should be prepared to continuously change, evolve, and adapt, and always focus on the things that are currently your biggest cultural bottlenecks. To conclude, I'd like to remind you of a saying famously attributed to Edison. Innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. That applies so well for both what an innovative culture actually looks like and what it takes to create one. So remember that a company with a true innovation culture usually isn't the most fun place to work at in the traditional meaning of the word, but that working in one usually is incredibly rewarding down the road once you succeed in making an impact. Anyway, if you get culture right, innovation will scale within your organization, so it's certainly worth the effort to invest in it. But that's been it for today. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions for us, please leave those in the comments below. Catch you again in the next one.